The little girl at the grave doesn't cry. She just lets a pebble fall from her mitten into the coffin and whispers, "Okay, you can rest now." Across the path, a man in an expensive coat stops breathing. Because the curve of her cheek, the set of her chin, he's seen them before in a mirror. Where in the world are you hearing this right now? Tell me in the comments, and then lean in. Because what happened in the next few minutes turned 3 orphans into something else entirely, and changed his life forever. They stood like 3 small stones at the lip of the open grave, wind pressing their black coats flat, mittens glossy with cold. Mira's shoulder pressed into Joe's arm looped around Eli's chest. They were shivering in unison without meaning to. The priest's words broke and softened in the winter air, a low hum in a choir of distant traffic and crows. The mother's name fell into the dirt, and the dirt took it. Mira counted breaths because counting felt like anchoring. In 2, 3. Out 2, 3. Joe tried to count 2, but the numbers turned into shapes. Eli's eyes flicked everywhere, grabbing facts like rope. The trees were alders. The grave diggers had frayed cuffs. The preacher's Bible had a broken spine. Facts steadied his throat, which had been tightening every time he thought he might cry. They had not let go of each other since the hospital said, "Time of death." Across the path, beneath the twisted branches of a leafless yew, a man watched. He wore a dark coat that didn't look warm because it had never needed to be. He had the kind of face Eli had seen on screens in news clips when the teacher talked about modern industry and philanthropy. But the man was not made for screens in that moment. He was standing wrong, both his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders caved, as if trying to disappear into the expensive wool. His name was Adrian Vale, and he had more money than anyone the children knew could imagine. He had come because a calendar reminder had sent him to an address. The address had become a cemetery, and the name on the headstone had cracked his history down the middle. Nadia Rahman, 1989-2025. His throat carried the echo of her laugh, the way she had leaned on a cafe counter and drawn a constellation on his wrist with a blunt pencil. The stubborn line of her mouth when she'd said, "No, Adrian, not like this." His private thought was that grief had an odor, cedry like the inside of a box that held old letters. And that smell rose from the soil and lodged in him. He had not known she had children. He had not in any real way known he could. Aunt Sarah, their mother's sister, touched the triplets' backs in turn. "Say goodbye," she whispered. "Say what you need, then we'll go." Mira stepped forward, scarf slipping. She looked down into the box, her fingers itched for a pencil. She wanted to draw their mother, but everything in her head was just a blur of hair and eyes, and a smile that wrinkled her nose. She swallowed. "Okay," she said to the plaque, "the flowers, the cold." She let a pebble fall from her glove. It clicked against wood. "Okay, you can rest now." Joe bent next fiercely, the way she did everything, elbows out, chin up. "I'm going to take care of them," she told the rectangle of raw earth. "I'm not going to let anyone." Her voice snagged. She bit the inside of her lip until it steadied. "We'll be okay, Mum, I promise you. We'll do the chore chart and everything." Eli leaned over last, trying to be precise. "You didn't like lilies because of the smell. These aren't lilies, they're carnations. Cheaper. Longer lasting. Sorry." He clutched the edge of the green carpet framing the grave. He wanted to say, "I remember the recipe for your lentil soup and how you hid the lemon. I remember how you tucked the blanket, hospital corners. I remember your hair smelled like coconut oil from a bottle with a crack near the cap." But the words jammed, and he finally managed. "I love you." They stepped back in a little knot. At the U, Adrian's heart did a strange, late thing. The triplets, he could see it now, how they were a chorus and also 3 solos. The girl with the paint on her shoelace kept dipping her chin like she was counting her own breaths. The other girl had a scuffed knee under her tights and a stare that could slice a room into parts. Joe, the fighter. The boy's ears were pink from cold and carefulness, Eli, and he kept pushing his glasses up even though they didn't slip. It was a first certainty cutting through him. They were Nadia's, the shape of their ears, the way the corners of their eyes creased. And if they were Nadia's, He swallowed too hard and tasted blood. Sarah turned to shepherd the children to the car, and it was then that the man in the expensive wrong coat took one step forward into the path. His name rippled on the air because someone nearby rustled a program with a photo of him. Because the world knew him even if the children did not. Sarah's eyes narrowed into a blade. "Mr. Vale," she said, and the name held frost. The children went still. Adrian's voice, when he found it, felt like something he'd left in a drawer too long. "Sarah." He nodded to her once, quick, as if he could fold himself into that courtesy. I didn't know," he said, and the words fell out of him like stones. His gaze skated to the children and back. "I didn't know, and I'm sorry. Now is not the time," Sarah said, standing between him and the triplets as if she had been practicing for this moment in her sleep. Eli peered around her elbow. "Who is he?" Sarah exhaled. The cold made it a cloud. Her jaw worked. She could have lied. She almost did. But the man's face was a billboard the city wore every day. He's someone your mum used to know," she said carefully. Then, because Joe's eyes were already sharpening, "Because 8-year-olds can smell evasion like smoke," she added. "He's Adrian Vale." All three children looked then properly, and in the cracked, quiet space by the U, with the winter light too white on stone, Adrian said the one true thing he had. I think I'm your father." Wind went through the trees in a single, loud hush. Mira's fingers yanked hard on Joe's sleeve. Joe's chin popped up another half-inch. Eli's breath hitched high in the cage of his chest. "You don't get to think that," Joe said, voice bright with the flair that got her in trouble at school. "You either are or you aren't." Adrian's mouth open, close. "There are tests," he said. "Answers." "I didn't know." "Your mother," he stopped. He could not say she didn't tell me without sounding like an accusation. I would have. He could not finish that either without a lie. Sarah's face had gone pale in a way that made the mole at her temple look darker. "You need to leave," she said. And even if the word please hovered, it didn't land. "Today is not—" "Wait," Eli said. A small flat sound that surprised them all. His mind had already fired off, little lights connecting. The way people looked at the man, the way Sarah had said his name, the way their mother never talked about their father like a story with chapters. "If it's true," he said, pushing his glasses. "If it's true, what do you want?" The question reached something in Adrian he hadn't known could be reached. He had a lot of answers, all of them wrong. He wanted to wind the tape back 8 years and catch Nadia's elbow as she left the cafe, make her look at him long enough to say, "I'm carrying something of you." He wanted to stiff-arm time and the machinery of his own life. He wanted to be the man who had already shown up. He said, simply, awkwardly, honestly, "I want to know you." "Like a science project," Joe snapped. "Like family," Adrian said, and the edges of the word cut his tongue. Sarah gathered the children with a glance. "We're going," she said, and began to steer them. The car beeping in the lot, the sound of tires crunching cold gravel, the smell of damp wool and faint cinnamon gum in her pocket. These were real. The man under the U was not. But as she turned, as she put a hand on Mira's back, as Eli's mitten caught on a thorn and he hissed, Adrian spoke again, something half desperate, half pleading, tearing through his carefulness. There's a letter," he said. All 4 heads turned. "In my office," he added quickly. From years ago. I found it this morning when I heard about—" He couldn't say when I heard about Nadia dying without shattering. "It's addressed to me. The handwriting, it's hers." Sarah's hand tightened and then loosened. He saw it, the tremor, the calculation, the sudden fear that anything might be possible. "Bring it," she said, voice low, eyes flat. The command of a woman who had kept a family upright with duct tape and will. "If it's real, if this is real, bring it to my house. You can have 10 minutes at the door. No more." "Where?" Adrian said too quickly. "Ask your calendar," Joe muttered. Rolling her eyes so hard Eli felt gravity tilt. Sarah named the street, and as the man under the U breathed it in, as he reached for his phone with a hand that couldn't decide if it was shaking or if the world was, the children turned away. They walked to the car. The grave behind them was a dark mouth swallowing flowers. The man in the expensive coat stood like a stake driven into the day, grief threading new and old through him. When the car door slammed and the heater stuttered warm, Eli leaned forward, seatbelt limp across his small lap. "What if he's telling the truth?" he asked. "What if he isn't?" Joe shot back. Mira, who hadn't said much because words felt like things that got stuck in her teeth, closed her eyes and saw perfectly the man's face as he had said family. Something in it had looked like the moment after their mother switched off a lamp, when you still see the light on the inside of your eyelids for a few seconds. "Either way," she said, opening them, her voice small and certain, "it's about to change. And because the day had been greedy, because it wanted one more last thing, because cliff edges are where stories like to begin," the car's console chimed. A text, Sarah's phone face up in the cup holder, from a number with no name. It said, "He was never supposed to know. Call me. VH." Sarah stared at it, the letters swimming. The children didn't know what they were looking at, not yet, but the heat in the car suddenly felt too hot. He had 10 minutes to become a different man. And as the car turned out of the cemetery, and the man reached for his own past like a rope, the sky let fall the first fat, cold drops of rain. Rain tapped the windshield with impatient fingers. The wipers smeared sky in grey arcs. The children's reflections floated in the glass, 3 ghost versions of themselves, while Sarah gripped the wheel and tried not to think of the text still glowing in her mind like an ember she couldn't stamp out. "He was never supposed to know. Call me. VH Victor Harlan." The name rose out of a drawer she had slammed shut years ago. A lawyer with delicate hands and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Shoe leather so glossy you could fall in. "Seatbelts," she said, because saying ordinary things erected small fences against the stampede inside her. At the cemetery gate, the car's blinker ticked a nervous heartbeat. They pulled into traffic. In the back seat, Joe scowled at the world sliding by as if it had personally offended her. Mira dug in her coat pocket for a pencil and realized she'd snapped the last one sometime between the hospital room and the grave. Eli pressed his palm against the cold triangle of window and watched the water-stitch frantic seams. "Do you think he has our noses?" Eli asked suddenly. "Like genetic noses. There's a thing called heritability coefficients," Sarah said. "I'm just saying, it would be interesting to know," he mumbled. Cheeks pink. At Sarah's apartment, the elevator smelled like laundry soap and someone's fried onions. They took off their wet coats and piled them on the radiator. The living room was the same it had been yesterday, but shifted, as if the furniture had scooted an inch when no one was looking. Nadia's blue scarf lay rehearsing her shape over the back of a chair. The triplets stood in the doorway, not sure how to move into a world without their mother in it. Sarah knelt to unlace boots. "Okay," she said. She needed to sound like a wall. "Hot chocolate. Then we talk about what happens next. No decisions tonight. We sleep and decide tomorrow." "Are we going to have to go to the—" Eli faltered. He couldn't say the word. Court sounded like a door. Foster sounded like a hallway. "Are we staying here with you?" "If I have anything to say about it," Sarah said. She did not say. "Nadia signed papers naming me guardian." She did not say. Papers do not always do what they are supposed to do. Instead, she stood and busied herself in the kitchen with the relief of someone shelving panic for later. At Adrian's office, the glass on the 34th floor reflected rain in tidy rivers. He had not gone home. He had chased the trembling thread inside him, straight to the building he'd made a career inside. As if money and glass could give him absolution at speed. He navigated the hall past the late-night hum of servers and the rolling chair squeal of a cleaner, his shoes leaving damp ovals on polished floor. In his office, the city sprawled. The far-off river wore dull metal light. He went straight to the bottom drawer of the credenza. "Why there?" And pulled out a stack of moleskin notebooks, a ribboned bundle of correspondence, a single envelope with a nicked corner. His name on the front in a handwriting he could have picked out of a room full of handwriting. Angled, decisive, impatient with loops. "Please," he said aloud to the empty room, the word an old prayer. "Please be real." He slid a finger under the flap as if it might break. Inside was a page, also angled, also decisive. The ink bled a little at the tail of each word, the way Nadia's words always had, because she wrote as if racing herself. "Adrian," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the clever man in the suit kept his word about storage. It means I destroyed the other copies and left this one in the place most likely to survive you. The clever man, Victor." The name was there in the next paragraph, like a trap. "Victor Harlan, do not trust him." She had underlined it once. "I trusted him once because I was tired and scared. I do not want to write the word pregnant, because it feels like if I don't write it, it will remain ours and not his father's machine." Adrian sat down hard. He did not breathe for a count of 3. "I told you to leave that night because I meant to be brave. I meant to tell you properly the next day, or the day after, when I could breathe again and you could look at me without the company looking through you. But your father came first. I think he was watching me the whole time. I should have seen it. He came with Victor and a piece of paper, and a smile like a trap. He said the company could not afford a scandal. He said I was too good for headlines. He said you were a good man and he meant to keep you that way, which somehow meant I should be quiet and go. He said he would take care of us if I signed, which meant he would never let you see us if I signed. Adrian, I signed. I hate that I did. But I signed because my braveness ran out when I put my hand on my stomach and felt the yes of it." Victor stood there with his delicate pen, and the NDA looked like a hotel towel, clean and reasonable, until I realized it was also a gag. The paper blurred. The rain beyond the glass laddered down. "I chose to be safe, not seen. I chose to raise them off your radar because I had reasons. Your father is a reason. And the men who circled him like planes trying to land are reasons. I told myself I would write to you when I could make it safe. Then time went fast in the dumb, sweet way it does when someone you love is small and keeps needing sandwiches. I kept making reasons. I made 100, and all of them were fear in a costume. There was a postscript. If I don't get to say this myself, you are not a machine. You know how to be a person. I saw it more than I should have let myself. Love, N." Adrian stared at the lines and felt the floor tilt. He pressed the paper flat and took a breath that hurt his ribs. Victor had been his father's lawyer since the year Adrian learned to tie a tie. The good suits. The knife blade smile. The phrase best for everyone. He could see Victor's hands in everything. The non-disclosure's sterile language, the smooth way information can vanish if you pay enough. His own father's willfulness ran under the words like a dark seam. "Call me," the text had said. He would. He didn't wait until morning. He didn't wait at all. He shoved the letter into a plastic sleeve, slid it into a leather portfolio as if swaddling something newly born, and left the office at a run he would be embarrassed about later. The elevator made its long, sighing descent. In the car he drove with the letter seat-belted. Every red light was an affront. He spoke to them like a lunatic. "Please, please." At Sarah's hot chocolate steamed in chipped mugs. The cocoa powder had formed one stubborn island on Eli's. He poked it until it sank. Joe argued that they were old enough to decide who saw them and when. Mira took the long view and asked whether the cat from next door would know to come paw at their balcony if their mother wasn't there to let it in. The doorbell cut through everything like a blade. No one moved at first, because no one believed it could already be time to do the next hard thing. Then Sarah stood, brushed her hands on her jeans, and went to press the button. "Up," she told the voice box. "3rd floor." Adrian stood in the pooling elevator light, hair damp, portfolio under one arm. He had not practiced what to say. His hands were empty on purpose. No flowers, no gifts, no money smell. He told himself that mattered, even though he knew it was still a shape he cast wherever he went. The door opened. The door opened. Sarah filled it. "I have it," he said, without hello, holding up the leather as if displaying a passport to a border guard. He did not try to push past. He had been that man often enough to know better. Sarah stepped aside without smiling. She let him into the hallway, but not the room. From the living room, 3 small faces lined up like a painting. The children's eyes did not glitter with hope or tears. They were simply watching like scientists at the window of a lab, waiting to see if the thing outside would do what the book said it would. Adrian's mouth went dry. "Hello," he said, voice smaller than he meant. "I brought the letter." "Show me," Sarah said, palm out. He put the portfolio into it. The exchange felt like something legal. His fingers brushed hers by accident. She did not flinch, and he was both grateful and annihilated by the fact of that. Sarah slid the letter out like a magician pulling silk from a sleeve. She read the first 3 lines standing. Her face went still like stone in heavy wind. She read the rest in a chair. She did not speak for a long minute after she finished, and in that minute the radiator ticked like a metronome, and Joe's breathing went loud, and Mira's pencil scraped slow circles on the back of an unpaid electricity bill. When Sarah finally looked up, her eyes were wet, but not furious. "She wrote this," she said. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. He had folded and refolded every second into this moment, and now he didn't know what to do with his empty hands. Sarah inhaled. She was proud. She said to him, and also to the air, to Nadia wherever she was now, and she was scared, and she had terrible taste in when to ask for help. Joe, who had climbed onto the arm of the couch, leaned forward hard enough that Eli put a steadying hand on her back without realizing. "So are you our father?" she demanded. "I think," Adrian started, and then because he had learned what he sounded like when he hedged, he lifted his chin and let himself stand in the truth. "Yes, I am. How do you know?" Eli said, not unkindly. Adrian gestured helplessly at the letter. "This. And if you want, we can do a test. I'll do whatever there is to do. I'll do it quietly. I'll wait how long you want me to wait." You can stop promising," Sarah said, not sharply. "Promises are easy." Adrian swallowed that like a pill. "Why didn't you come?" Mira asked from behind the rim of her mug, voice blurred with something like disappointment and accusation twined. "If she wrote, why didn't you come then?" "Because I didn't know," he said. Not defensive, not angry, just cut open. He told them about the bottom drawer and the letter wrapped among notebooks, and how this morning's news had been a blow that knocked him into a room where he finally saw it on the floor. He did not say much about his father, except "My father made choices that sent me in the wrong direction." He said, "I should have known anyway, because that also felt true, even if it didn't make logical sense." It was a kind of responsibility that stuck to him, from his hair to his bones. Joe made a noise that could have been a scoff or a laugh. "We don't need you," she said, and her eyes burned. "We've had years of not needing you," the words hit. Adrian let them. "I know," he said, "and I don't want to. I don't want to fix something that isn't broken. If there's any part of your life where I could be useful. Eli echoed, unsure whether the word was ridiculous or exactly right. "I have resources," Adrian said, hating the way the word tasted in the air like metallic apology. "But I can make pancakes. I burn the first one, every time." Mira almost smiled and then swallowed it. Her pencil made a loop. Sarah stood and breathed out as if she'd been wedged in a small space. "You can have 10 minutes, she said. "The letter buys that. You can have 10 minutes to sit with them and answer questions. Then you go, and after today you call, you don't arrive, you send emails." "You wait," "Okay," Adrian said. The word felt like kneeling. He sat on the edge of an armchair, perched like a bird afraid to be large in the room. The children remained on the couch, 3 points in a line. He told them small things that did not feel like bribes. That he grew tomatoes on a roof, badly. That he never finished a book and then told people he had. That he sometimes parked his car too far from the curb and pictured his father clucking his tongue. He did not say he owned 3 buildings on the street around the corner, because that was the kind of sentence that made a room tip. "You look like the guy on the billboard with the solar panels," Eli said, almost to himself. Unfortunately, Adrian said, the hair is the same. Mira drew him holding a tomato. It was accidental and then satisfying. When the doorbell rang a second time, it sounded different, louder, impatient. Sarah froze mid-breath. Adrian looked at her with quick alarm. The triplets stared at the door with identical surprise like startled owls. "Stay," Sarah said to the children, and went spine stiff. Through the peephole she saw the clean part in a head of white hair. The expensive umbrella folded, the monogram on a briefcase. When she opened the door, the cologne hit first, citrus and courtrooms. Victor Harlan's smile was already in place. "Sarah," he said smoothly, as if they had shared tea yesterday and not a disappearance years ago. His eyes slid past her shoulder, and she saw the moment he clocked Adrian in the chair, small as it was. His eyebrows barely moved. "We should talk." Sarah's hand tightened on the door in an instinct the body makes when it remembers a fire too near curtains. "You should leave," she said. "You're not welcome here." "I think, given the complications," Victor began. "You should leave," Sarah said again, voice low enough to mean something beyond the doorstep. Behind her, Adrian stood. Some old suit of his slid onto him without invitation. The one that was firm and cold and bored of being interrupted. But the letter in Sarah's hands, and the fact of 3 small faces in his periphery, kept the suit from fitting the way it used to. He walked to the doorway slowly, like a man trying not to scare a deer. "Victor," he said finally, and the name sounded like a strand breaking. Victor's smile bent. "Adrian," he replied. "You've gotten wet." "I'm fine," Adrian said. "Why are you here?" "Because I represent the interests that keep our lives from becoming messy," Victor said pleasantly. "And because it's late, and emotions are high, and because there is a will, and documents, and what?" Sarah demanded. Victor rested his palm on the crook of his briefcase handle, as if it were a living thing. "And a clause," he said. "A clause that names a guardian who is not you." Sarah's breath snagged, and in the living room the triplets felt it in their own chests like a fishhook. "Who?" Adrian asked, though his mouth already tasted of old boardrooms and old betrayals and the lemon cold of his father's favorite gin. Victor looked up, eyes bright with the pleasure of unveiling a mechanism. "Me," he said. The radiator ticked once and then went quiet, as if even the metal was waiting. For half a second nobody moved. The apartment hung in a terrible pause, like the building itself was taking another breath. Sarah found words first. "No," she said, so flat and sure that the word seemed to nail itself to the floor. "Absolutely not. Nadia would never." Victor tilted his head like a gull. "Nadia signed papers she didn't read," he said, and some ugly satisfaction crept around the edges of his voice. "She was under duress at the time. She trusted people not to bury traps in the clauses. But I know you know how these things go." Sarah thought of the tiny tremor in Nadia's hand. The day she came home from that meeting, pregnant and quiet and pretending to be ordinary in a world that had tilted out of shape. The anger that hit Sarah now was so pure she could taste metal. "Get out," she said, stepping forward, shoulders wide. "Or I'll call the police." "The police will ask to see the paperwork," Victor replied mildly. "And when they do," Adrian cut in. "Nadia's letter says not to trust you," he said, and it gave him a savage, simple joy to lay those words down like a line of salt. "It says exactly that." "Letters don't cancel contracts," Victor murmured. "Maybe not," Adrian said, "but nothing about what you're proposing is ethical. We both know why you're here. This isn't about Nadia's wishes or the children's welfare. It's about keeping me managed." There was an odd calm in him, like standing in the eye of a storm and seeing finally what the winds had always been carrying. "That ends tonight." Victor's eyes darkened with something like contempt. Or maybe it was only fatigue, the tiredness of a man who'd always won and found winning temporarily complicated. "Adrian," he said, dropping his voice a notch, "let me protect you. There are headlines in this. Ugly ones. You will be accused of abandoning a woman, of hiding children. Your philanthropic campaigns will—" "Stop," Adrian said. "You don't get to talk about my reputation while trying to walk off with my children." They aren't yours yet, Victor said, the word yet slipping like ice. Behind Sarah's shoulder, the triplets stood coiled. Eli's fingers had gone white around the edge of the couch. Mira reached and slid her hand over his. Joe had moved to the middle of the rug without planning to, as if she could plug a hole in the house by standing there. Go, Sarah said for the third time, and now there was the edge of a plea in it. Victor made an elegant show of checking his watch, as if this were a conference and time could be itemized. I'll be back at 9 in the morning with an order, he said. Do consider your options, all of you. He dipped his head at Sarah, then at Adrian, contempt smoothed back into manners. He left a faint smell of citrus and nickel when he turned and walked down the hall. When the door clicked shut, Joe exploded, voice a spark to gasoline. He can't take us. We're not luggage. She was breathing in short, hard bursts and didn't know how to slow them down. He won't, Sarah said quickly, kneeling. So they were a 4-point circle, 3 children and 1 aunt, who felt suddenly like a tent pole in a rising wind. He won't. I won't let him. I have Nadia's guardianship papers. They're not perfect, but they're something. And we have. She looked at Adrian reluctantly. We have resources we didn't have yesterday. Adrian understood the gamble he was being measured for, and he didn't insult anyone in the room by pretending to be small. He won't take you, he said, and the words had a shape inside them that made Eli's shoulders drop half an inch. He'll try to frighten us. He's good at it. He's had practice. But we can move faster. How? Eli asked, practical already clicking through imaginary flowcharts. What is a good idea to do right now? First, Adrian said, we document. Photos of the letter, photos of the guardianship papers. We put things in hands that can hold them. Second, we keep you somewhere safe tonight in case anyone tries to serve us papers in a way that complicates mourning. He looked at Sarah. I have a place. Joe's eyes narrowed. A mansion, she said, making the word bite. A building with a sleeping floor and locks, Adrian said. And 2 security guards who watch cat videos mostly, but will be happy to watch the door. He swallowed the urge to say it's not a trap. It's a stopgap. We'll be together or we won't, you decide. But I don't want you scared in your own beds. The room held its breath again. Mira looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the triplets. The decision passed between them in a thing like light. Joe lifted her chin. We go, she said. Together. Eli nodded. Together, he echoed, because the word felt like a rope of its own. They moved. It is a particular kind of memory made by packing under threat, the quiet speed, the soft drawers that make loud noises. The toothbrushes swept into a zip bag, the flat clatter of a hairbrush. Joe counted socks out loud because numbers made a wall. Mira found Nadia's scarf and wrapped it around Sarah's neck without speaking, as if the fabric might confer authority. Eli put their mother's recipe book into his backpack like a heart. Adrian stood a little to the side and did menial things with gratitude. He pulled the duvet covers up after the kids lifted their pillows. He handed Sarah a band of elastic from the floor. He wrote his number and the number of his lawyer, not his father's, different people entirely, on a sticky note and stuck it to the fridge like a talisman. In the hallway, the elevator made its slow climb. The doors parted with an old sigh. In the parking garage, the concrete smelled wet and metallic. Adrian had left his car under a green exit sign, and the light made the rain on its windshield look like static. The triplets buckled themselves without being asked. Sarah slipped into the passenger seat and held the portfolio like a baby, even though the letter was now safely copied to 3 phones and 2 emails. And some cloud that existed in a humming server room no one in the car would ever see. They pulled out of the garage into rain that blurred every street light into a smear. The city passed in streaks of gold and gray. No one spoke much. The only sounds were the wipers and the small shift of the triplets leaning against each other in the back seat. Adrian's place turned out to be a converted warehouse on a quiet street. Brick, tall windows, no sign. Inside, a night guard nodded them in. The elevator opened into a warm, open space with 3 bedrooms, stocked bookshelves and a kitchen so neat it looked unused. "You'll be safe here," Adrian said. "Lock the door from the inside. I'll stay up." Sarah ushered the children to brush teeth and change, moving like someone who knew she couldn't stop moving yet. Soon Mira was curled with a sketch pad. Eli inspected every cupboard like he was mapping it, and Joe pretended not to like the soft bed she'd claimed. Adrian stood in the kitchen, unsure where to put his hands. Finally, he stepped onto the small balcony, called Rena, and explained fast. The clause, Victor's visit, the letter. She promised to pull every thread by morning. When he came back inside, Mira was waiting with a hair elastic. "My braid," she said simply. He fumbled through it, hands clumsy but careful. Joe watched from her doorway without admitting it. They were settling into a fragile quiet when the buzzer sounded. Ortega's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Vale, there's a man here. Says he's your father." Sarah stiffened. Adrian's jaw locked. "Let him up," he said finally. The elevator opened to Maxwell Vale, tailored coat, eyes sharp as glass. Father and son faced each other in the hallway. "You've made a mistake," Maxwell said. "I've made a choice," Adrian replied. His father's gaze flicked toward the closed apartment door. "They'll ruin you, maybe," Adrian said, "but you already did." Maxwell's mouth twitched. 9 a.m., he said. "Caught." He left without looking back. When Adrian returned, the triplets were sitting together on the couch like three wary sentries. No one asked what was said, they didn't need to. Tomorrow would come, and they'd face it together. Morning came fast. They moved quietly, each with a bag and the weight of things unsaid. The city outside was wet and pale as they slipped into Adrian's car. Sarah's jaw was set, the triplets stuck close together, like magnets in a strange room. At the courthouse steps, Rena was waiting, hair up, coffee in one hand, a slim folder in the other. "Victor's already inside," she said. "Tried to file for emergency custody before breakfast. Sloppy, he's worried." Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than TV made it. The judge was brisk, the air heavy with paper and old carpet. Victor stood with his perfect tie and smooth voice, talking about continuity of care and the children's best interests, slipping his claws across the bench like it was a gift. Maxwell sat in the back, silent but radiating ownership. When it was Rena's turn, she rose like she'd been waiting years for this exact fight. "Your Honor, the clause Mr. Harlan waves around is a conflict of interest nightmare. We also have a text from him. He was never supposed to know, and a letter from the children's late mother, Victor Harlan. Do not trust him. The mother's appointed guardian is here, Sarah Rahman, and paternity testing is in process. Preliminary results today." Victor's smile faltered. "No contact with the children without Miss Rahman's consent. Temporary visitation rights to Mr. Vale, contingent on paternity results." The gavel came down like a clean cut. Outside, cameras swarmed the steps. Rena muttered, "Ignore them," and herded everyone toward the car. The triplets kept their heads down. Inside the safety of the vehicle, Eli finally breathed out. "So, that's good. It's a start," Sarah said. Back at the safe house, they cut strawberries in the kitchen. The air almost light again. Then Sarah's phone rang. "Debbie from the lab, preliminaries in. 99.97%. He's their dad." Sarah repeated it aloud. Mira's eyes flicked to Adrian's. Joe stared at him a long moment, then said, "Okay," and walked away before anyone could see her smile. The buzzer went again. Ortega's voice. "Press outside," and Mr. Harlan, with a camera crew. "He's talking." Joe's head snapped toward the window. "He can't use our faces," she said. "He won't," Adrian answered, already turning to Rena. "Draft the statement, the truth, short, clear, ours." Before anyone could speak, a woman's voice came from the hall. "Let me in, please. I need to see my grandchildren." When Adrian opened the door, a gray-braided woman stood there with a paper bag and kind, storm-colored eyes. "Hello, Adrian," she said. "I'm Lila Vale." She looked past him, at three astonished faces. "And I've been your grandmother for 8 years." The triplets froze, as if the word grandmother had dropped the temperature. Joe's eyes narrowed. Mira tilted her head like she was sketching Lila into memory. Ela's voice was barely above a whisper. "You knew I suspected," Leela said. "Your mother was brave and surrounded by men who thought secrecy was protection. I stayed close in the only way I could, watching from a distance. I am sorry for that." She set the bag on the counter. "Eat. Talking is easier when your hands are busy." The samosas smelled of spice and warmth. Even Joe accepted one. Sarah watched Leela carefully, the way you watch someone who could be ally or threat. Lila caught her gaze and said softly, "I'm here for them, not for him." She didn't need to say which him. The days stretched under the weight of media noise outside. Adrian met Leela's eyes once and saw for the first time someone else in his family who understood the cost of defying Maxwell Vale. They spoke quietly in the kitchen, about Victor, about Nadia, about what came next. "You have to make a choice that holds," Lila told him. "Not just for court. For them." By afternoon, the final DNA report arrived. Official, undeniable. Sarah laid it on the table in front of the triplets. "It's true," she said simply. "Adrian is your father." Silence followed. Then Eli asked, "So what now?" Adrian crouched so he was eye level with all three. "Now I'm here. However you'll have me. I can wait, I can visit, or, if you ever want, I can stay." Joe studied him like she could see straight through the words. "You'll mess up," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Probably a lot. And you don't get to leave when it's hard." "I won't," he said, and something in his voice made her believe him just enough to nod. The protective order against Victor became permanent 2 weeks later. Maxwell didn't appear again. Rena worked the legal threads until custody was shared. Sarah as primary guardian, Adrian as co-parent, with no room for clauses in the fine print. But trust did not sign itself just because a judge signed papers. It arrived in inches. The triplets took to visiting Adrian's building after school. First with Sarah, then without. When they realized the guard at the desk kept a jar of peppermints and a notebook where he wrote down the names of birds that landed on the streetlight outside. Mira started sketching the lobby's plants in the afternoons, lining them up like quiet people. Eli discovered the roof had a wind that made kites possible even on boring days. Joe inspected the locks herself, declared them acceptable, then pretended she hadn't. On Fridays, the kitchen filled with the chaos of pancakes. Adrian burning the first one reliably and theatrically, Eli timing the bubbles, Mira making faces in the batter on purpose, Joe insisting on flipping and breaking a spatula. "That's a cheap one," she accused the spatula. As if it had betrayed her, Sarah watched with a guarded softness, like a lighthouse that loved ships but never forgot the rock. Sometimes late, after the kids fell asleep on the couch with a movie's blue light washing over their socks, Adrian and Sarah sat on the balcony with mugs, city below like a circuit board. They talked about Nadia, the way she loved limes, how she stayed up too late sewing costumes with a mouth full of pins, how she could not pass a stray cat without clicking her tongue. They did not talk about the NDA unless the night demanded honesty. And then they did, and then they were quiet, both of them staring into a dark that would never return the years it ate. Rena kept sending updates like small flags planted in mud. Victor sanctioned for unethical conduct. Maxwell's influence shrinking where it had once been floodplain. Lila arrived every Sunday with food that looked like it could heal a week. Sarah and Lila learned to share a kitchen the way mothers share space on a playground. A little territorial, a lot grateful, occasional elbows softened by laughter. The story might have ended there if stories were honest about the work of ordinary days. But a week is a house with many doors, and trouble likes keys. It was a Thursday when Joe didn't come out of school. Sarah was in the car with Mira and Eli, the heater sputtering like a polite dragon. Children poured out of the building like marbles from a jar. Eli kept count without meaning to. The number that matched Joe didn't appear. "Bathroom," Mira said quickly, because the world had to stay normal until proven otherwise. They waited 5 minutes. 10. Sarah dialed the school office. "We're looking," said the receptionist, in a tone meant for panicky parents. The principal appeared at the door, talking to a security guard. When Joe finally walked out, she wasn't alone. A woman with a clipboard hovered like a shadow, glossy smile, suit the color of a bruised badge that said Child and Family Services. Sarah stepped out of the car so fast her scarf snagged. "What is this?" "Just a routine interview," the woman said cheerfully. "We received an anonymous tip about instability in the home. We're doing our due diligence." Her eyes flicked to the triplets and lingered a fraction on Joe's fierce face. "You must be Sarah. I'd like a word." Sarah had the kind of calm you borrow from cliffs. "You can have a word in my lawyer's office," he said. "Not at the curb with my niece and nephews." The woman's smile didn't slip, which meant it had practice. "Of course, I'll be in touch." On the drive to Hadrian's, no one spoke. The car seemed to have learned silence as a language. Joe stared out at the smear of city, jaw hard line, knuckles white around the seatbelt. Eli read the words on billboards backward and forward, a nervous skill. Mira pressed her fingers into the fog of her window, drew 3 dots and a half-finished heart. Adrian was in the lobby by the time they arrived, coat on, keys in hand like he could unlock the day if he found the right door. "What happened?" he asked. "Someone tipped Family Services," Sarah said, and her voice made the air cooler. "Adrian tasted the name Victor the way you taste blood after biting your cheek. Let me fix this," he started. "Do not fix," Sarah said. "Stand with." "I can stand," he said, and did. He called Rena, who called a woman named Tahira, who had the stare of a hawk and the patience of a saint. Within hours, paperwork grew a spine. Within days, the anonymous tip was tracked through a trail of phone numbers that smelled like Victor's cologne. The hearing was quick and lethal. The judge, who'd liked Rena's scalpel voice, liked it again. "Do not weaponize agencies meant to protect children," she said, and banged her gavel like a hand on a table when dinner has gone on too long. Victor's license went on a shelf for a while. He stayed off camera because sharks don't wave at drones. Maxwell sent a note, "This is beneath us." Adrian sent it back with a single line, "It always was." The triplets watched the adults wage war in sensible shoes and learned something they would never unlearn. Love is not a feeling alone. It is a stance you take in public. Spring leaked into the city without asking anyone's permission. The days smelled less like salt and more like rain and bricks warming. The corner fruit stand put strawberries out like jewels. Nadia's grave sprouted a fringe of brave green. Mira started drawing her mother's hands everywhere. On homework margins, on napkins, on the frost of the bathroom mirror. Hands kneading dough, hands tucking, hands dancing above a steering wheel. On nights she couldn't sleep, she slipped to Adrian's kitchen, sat at the island with an apple, and drew until the electric hum of the fridge steadied her ribs. Sometimes Adrian woke, came out with a blanket, and draped it over her shoulders without speaking. He had learned the trick of being present without being loud. Eli fell in love with the roof. He charted wind patterns with a notebook and a ribbon tied to a chopstick. He calculated where a kite would climb, where it would scream downward, how to pull just enough to keep it laughing in the sky. On a Sunday afternoon, Adrian came up with a crimson delta kite he'd ordered and pretended to have always owned. Together they fed it into the wind until it lifted in a swift yes. "Angle of attack," Eli breathed, delighted. "Like 25 degrees, maybe 30. Adrian laughed and learned the language of a boy who measures joy. Joe fought with a girl in her class. Not fists this time, but words sharp as bottled glass. The girl had said something about children without fathers always acting out. Joe told her she had won now, actually, and the girl called her a liar, and Joe called her a statistic. It cost Joe her lunch recess, and earned her a note home. Adrian didn't punish her. He took her for hot chocolate, and asked her to tell him the truth small enough to hold. She told him she was afraid of needing someone who might decide one day that need was inconvenient. He listened, and when the silence had stretched enough to mean he'd understood, he said, "I'm here for the inconvenient parts." She rolled her eyes because that was her first language, but the milk foam on her upper lip trembled. Sarah found herself laughing at jokes she would have missed in the dark weeks. Lila taught her how to make a cardamom tea the way Nadia loved it. Boil the milk longer. Don't rush the leaves. Patience has a taste. They spoke about daughters and men and the endangered species of apologies that arrive on time. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they sat quiet, companionship like a shawl. Then on a Thursday when the sky was daring blue, Maxwell sent an invitation. Not a demand, not a threat. A clean white card edged in gold. Family dinner, Saturday. No press. Lila will be there. Come alone, Adrian. Sarah said no. Rena said trap. Lila sighed into the phone. I will be there, she told Sarah. I can't promise I can stop him, but I can witness. Adrian stared at the card like it was a math problem, whose variables kept changing. He knew how to refuse the man his father was at a podium. He did not know how to refuse the man who used to hand him orange slices after soccer and say, "Don't quit what you started, son," and mean soccer and mean everything. He went. The house smelled like lemon oil and the kind of money that remembers being new. Lila hugged him at the door the way a person grips a rope. Maxwell poured gin as if he was staining the evening with tradition. The dining room glowed honey-warm. Cutlery lay obedient as soldiers. I want to propose a scholarship, Maxwell said halfway through a roast that had been cooked by a ghost named Staff. For Nadia. For girls who make the kind of choices she was forced to make. We establish a fund. We shape the narrative. Shape. Adrian repeated the word carefully, like he was setting it down on a shelf out of children's reach. She wasn't clay. Maxwell leaned back. He was elegant with his knives. He never drew blood in the living room. You want to be a father? Fine, be a father. But stop dramatizing the world. It isn't a movie, it's a ledger. The columns either balance or they don't. Some columns aren't supposed to, Adrian said. That's how you know you're not a machine. Maxwell smiled thin. You sound like Nadia, he said. And for a breath, warmth flickered in his voice. A memory of a woman who had made rooms change temperature by walking into them. Then it was gone. If you continue to antagonize me publicly, he added, I'll stop pretending I don't have the ability to antagonize you privately. Your board is restless, your shares share. Then buy me out, Adrian said, surprising even himself with the sudden clean cut of the idea. I'll start again. Something that makes sense. Maxwell blinked slowly, recalculating the way men do when their leverage evaporates and leaves the shape of the truth. You won't, I might, Adrian said. I'm not afraid, you are always afraid, Maxwell said. You just hide it behind philanthropy and rooftop tomatoes. The tomatoes. Adrian smiled without humor. You know what? They're terrible. I'm learning. Leela set her napkin down gently. Enough, she said, voice quiet and heavy as a quilt pulled over a sleeping child. Maxwell, leave the boy alone. He found his life. His life, Maxwell said with a little scoff. A woman with too much stubbornness and 3 children who need what he cannot give. He can give exactly what they need, Leela said, and her hands trembled with all the years she had been silent. A father who admits he is learning. Silence rang like crystal after it's been tapped. Adrian stood. He wasn't dramatic about it. He simply stood and pushed his chair back and said, I have a movie to watch with my kids, like a man who knew what mattered and where it was. Lila kissed his cheek as he passed. He did not look back. He stopped at Nadia's grave on the way home with a paper cup of tea, milk, cardamom, patience. He poured a splash onto the soil because Nadia had liked sharing tastes. I'm trying, he told the stone. I'm late, but I'm trying. Wind moved the leaves the way a mother moves a blanket. It didn't answer, but it didn't argue. On the first hot day of summer, the city stuck to itself. Buses sighed, pigeons argued. The old man at the bodega watered the sidewalk like it could grow shade. Adrian took the kids to the pool at the public center, because money doesn't make chlorinated laughter less alive. Eli wore goggles like a scientist approaching a volatile experiment. Mira floated on her back, ears half submerged so the world sounded like a seashell. Joe cannonballed dangerously close to the no diving sign and argued with a lifeguard named Carl, who, to his credit, did not quit his job. On the walk home, dripping, flip-flops slapping the sidewalk rhythm, they passed a lot that had been nothing for years. Weeds, broken glass, a fence advertising condos that never arrived. A woman from the neighborhood was folding chairs there, sweeping in wide arcs like she was erasing a mistake. A hand-painted sign leaned against a cinder block. Community night, open mic, free food, free haircuts, bring your heart. Mira stopped dead. Look, she said, tugging at Adrian's sleeve even though touching him still felt like stepping off a curb. On the fence, another sign. Nadia Rumman Memorial. Someone had tacked up photos. Nadia with a paint-splattered apron. Nadia reading a book on a stoop. Nadia holding a baby with a smile so bright it could solder metal. Sarah came around the corner with a tray of samosas and eyes already shining. "Surprise," she said. Adrian's mouth went dry. "What did you do?" "What she asked me to, years ago, when she was healthy and the world was obedient," Sarah said. "She wanted a place that didn't cost more than a bus fare to feel human in. A little art, a little food, a haircut if you can't afford one." She kept saying, "It doesn't have to be fancy, Sarah. It just has to be ours." Leela arrived with more food. Rena brought clipboards and a power strip because she didn't know how not to. Ortega showed up in a shirt that said "Good Trouble" and started stringing lights with a teenager who climbed like a cat. They set up folding tables. Eli calculated how many paper cups fit into a case and then argued with Joe about whether lemonade or water went faster when air was this hot. Mira taped butcher paper to a wall and wrote in block letters, "Draw what you miss, draw what you have," and handed out crayons like talismans. As the sun slid down its wire, the lot filled with neighbors. A barber named Lewis started giving precise fades under a tree. A woman sang Sam Cooke like she'd been waiting to for 50 years. A boy recited a poem about a dog who could smell the weather. Sarah read a letter she and Nadia had written together once. The kind you write when you don't know if you'll get to read it. "Be kind to your future self," it said. "Do not barter joy for safety." Victor didn't show, Maxwell didn't either. Their empty chairs were a blessing. Adrian spoke last, not because he wanted to, but because Sarah squeezed his hand and said, "Say something small. Not a speech, just a true thing." He stood on a milk crate. The kids flanked him like bodyguards who hadn't decided yet whether to tackle or hug. He looked at the faces, sweaty, tired, hungry, gleaming, and found his voice where the fear used to be. "I didn't know," he said, "but I do now, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life learning what to do with that knowledge." Nadia wanted a place where we could be together without paying to be human. This is that place. If you need something, say it. If you have something, share it. If you're alone, come here. He cleared his throat, ruined by sentiment. "Also, our pancakes are terrible, but improving." Laughter moved through the lot like a fan. Music rose, lights warmed. Eli lay on the grass with his arms flung, counting airplay. Mira drew faces on paper plates until the plates looked back at her with expressions that surprised her. Joe danced like a girl who had decided for 1 minute not to be suspicious of joy. By the end of the night, someone had spray-painted the fence in neat, defiant letters, "Nadia's lot." Under it, smaller, "Open late for love." They went home sticky and full. In the lobby, the guard showed Eli a moth the size of a hand on the light fixture. "Atlas," Eli whispered, reverent. At bedtime, Joe lingered at the doorway again. "Good night, Dad," she said, not testing anymore. A word placed carefully on a shelf so it didn't fall. Adrian stood in the quiet after the kids' doors clicked shut and felt like a man exactly where he was meant to be. But the story didn't close. It widened because the lot wanted more, because the kids wanted more, because grief, when it heals, asks to be made useful. Autumn came with a sharpness to it, like the city had shaved. School began. The lot sprouted a tarp and then a roofline. Grants materialized where Rena pointed. A builder donated pallets. A carpenter named Sal turned them into walls that smelled like pine and hope. The sign over the door read Nadia House, letters cut from tin, edges smoothed so no one would be hurt by touching her name. Inside, a tiny library grew. Comics with cracked spines, cookbooks with marginalia, paperbacks that smelled like basements in summer. A corner held sewing machines. Another, a whiteboard where kids wrote jokes that were only funny because they were terrible. A bulletin board bloomed with post-its. Got extra carrots. Babysitting trade, math help twos. Band needs drummer. No pay or glory. A framed page of Nadia's recipe for lentil soup hung in the kitchen. Eli's handwriting below it, the word lemon underlined twice. On the first day it opened officially, they cooked for an army that didn't know it was arriving. Lila stirred soup with a spoon like an oar. Sarah cut onions with a speed that suggested she had opinions about onions. Adrian manned the pancake station as if it were a confessional. The kids, these 3 and a dozen more, moved between tasks like molecules, colliding into laughter. Maxwell came that afternoon, alone, no cameras, no cologne. He stood across the street and watched the door open and close and open and close. People carrying something in and out you could not put in a ledger. A little relief, a little safety, a little belonging. He looked old in a way he never had when he was winning. He almost crossed. He almost said a true thing. He didn't. He walked away. Victor, rumor said, had moved to a firm in a city that liked him less. He sent a letter with an apology that read, like it had been written by hands used to pushing blame around a desk. Sarah read it and put it in a drawer that said, for rainy days, I need to remember I wasn't crazy, and then forgot about it, because real life was heavier and better. The triplets kept becoming themselves. Mira asked if she could paint the back wall of Nadia House. Not a mural, she said. A timeline. She covered it in dates and swaths of color. The hospital day, the grave day, the day of the letter, the hearing, the kite, the night the lot learned music. She left space at the end and wrote in pencil, to be continued if we're brave. People added their own dates. Day I got sober. Day I adopted my dog. Day the twins' dad came back. The wall became a heartbeat. Eli built a weather station on the roof. A cup anemometer that spun like joy. A thermometer shielded from the sun because accuracy is respect. A notebook that filled with numbers that made sense of days that didn't. He taught a boy named Malik how to chart pressure. Malik taught him how to fix a bicycle chain so it never slipped again. On afternoons when the sky glowered, they stood in the doorway and smelled rain coming and said, at the same time, 3 minutes. Joe started a Saturday boxing class in the yard. Pads, not sparring. Power without hurt. You don't hit people, she told the motley crew of kids. You hit at the air that thinks it can push you around. She made everyone take turns holding the pads because holding is a skill too. A girl who didn't speak at school said again after her third combination. Joe pretended not to notice, then smiled when the girl wasn't looking. On a cold night a year after the grave, they planned the grandest thing they could think of that wasn't fancy. A block party that felt like a miracle someone had practiced. They hung lights in loops like handwriting. They borrowed a projector and painted a sheet white to make a movie screen. They wrote Nadia Night on poster board and taped it to lampposts. People came like they had been walking toward this night their whole lives. Mothers and uncles, teens with big headphones, old men in hats nobody made anymore, toddlers with the balance of loose branches. Lila wore a shawl, the color of sunset. Rena brought a clipboard, because she is who she is. Ortega found an extension cord that was either illegal or a blessing. Before the movie, Sarah stood with a microphone that squealed, because microphones are dramatic. 1 year, she said, eyes shining. Thank you for teaching us that love can be a building with a door propped open. Adrian went last again, because Sarah trusted him with last now. He didn't stand on a milk crate. He stood on the ground. He looked at the triplets. Mira with paint on her thumb, Eli with wind in his hair, Joe with tape on her knuckles and a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there last winter. He swallowed. I used to think love was something you deliver, he said. Now I know it's something you build. and then rebuild, and then hold up in the wind. He turned to the kids, to the crowd, to the night. Thank you for letting me try. It might have ended there with applause and a movie and paper cups of cocoa if this were only a sweet story. But the night wanted a last test, because acceptance isn't a word. It's what you do when something goes wrong and you do not run. Halfway through the film, the projector coughed and died. The sheet fluttered. The crowd murmured the way crowds do when disappointed. Kids looked at the adults like the sky had cancelled stars. Adrian stepped forward to fix it and made it worse. Eli crouched and checked connections. Fast hands and calm breath, muttering voltage ranges like prayers. Nothing. Then Joe climbed onto a chair and shouted, "Plan B!" Her voice cut the air like a flag unfurling. We don't need pictures, we tell it, like a story. She looked at Sarah. Sarah looked terrified and thrilled. Leela clapped once, decisive. Mira grabbed markers. We can draw the scenes as we go, she said, flipping the butcher paper and taping it to the fence, like live caption. She drew a stick figure with audacity for hair and wrote scene 1. Girl with samosa, and the crowd laughed, because they knew exactly who she meant. Sarah started, voice steadying as it went. Once there were 3 small stones by a hole in the ground, she said, and the city went quiet enough to hear the string of lights hum. And there was a man under a yew who didn't know he was a forest. She told the year in beats. Rena chimed in with a one-liner about wolves in cardigans. Ortega mimed stringing lights with the seriousness of a surgeon. Kids shouted their favorite moments. The kite, the first pancake that burned like a sacrifice. When Joe made me hit the air and it hit back less. Adrian didn't speak. He listened with his whole face. The way a man listens when the ledger has turned into a mural and he wants to memorize it. When Sarah reached the part where Joe said, "Good night, Dad," the crowd made a soft sound, a shared exhale. Mira drew a little apartment window with 3 lights and a 4th flicking on, as if it had finally decided the room deserved brightness. Then Eli, who had been standing with his hands on the dead projector like a doctor on a pulse, lifted his head. "It's back," he said, a grin cracking the carefulness of his mouth. The image stuttered, steadied, painted the sheet with light. They could have turned back to the film. No one did. Sarah handed the microphone to Adrian. He shook his head. He didn't need it. He crossed the yard to where the triplets stood. Mira speckled with ink, Joe smelling like tape and peppermint, Eli buzzing like a small, kind transformer. And he did the only grand right thing left. He knelt, not like a proposal, not like a spectacle. He knelt because his face should be where their eyes were, because fathers ought to know the height of the people they love. "I can't give you back what we missed," he said, quiet enough that only the close ring of them heard and loud enough that the night carried it to the fence. "But I can stand with you while we make the rest." Mira's hand found the back of his neck like she was guiding him in a drawing. Eli leaned into his shoulder with a scientist's certainty after sufficient data. Joe stood very still, and then, with the smallest movement that felt like an earthquake, hooked her pinky around his. "Family meeting," Joe announced suddenly to the crowd, eyes glinting. 5 minutes. They dragged him to the table with a paper tablecloth that had become a living document. They wrote a list, house rules. Joe dictated. 1. Nobody leaves when it's inconvenient. Lila, not to be outdone, wrote 5. Make tea for grief and set another cup for joy. It's coming. Adrian looked at the list and then at the faces who had written it and thought, this is the deed to my life. They turned the projector off on purpose. They kept telling the story instead, neighbors trading lines like bread. The night grew cold in the way that makes people huddle closer. Otis Redding hummed from a radio. Someone cried in the corner and didn't have to apologize for it. Stars pushed through the city haze like stubborn truths. When it was late enough that even stubborn children gave up on pretending not to be sleepy, Sarah clapped and said, home, in her aunt voice that could land planes. People folded chairs. The lights went dark with little pops. The block settled. Adrian and the triplets walked the 2 blocks home with Lila and Sarah, paper cups empty, list rolled in Joe's fist like a flag. Their building's entry light had a moth doing frantic math against the bulb. In the elevator, Eli leaned against Adrian's side in the boneless way of a kid who trusts gravity again. Mira traced the bones of his hand with her finger like a map she had decided to keep. Joe stared at the mirror and did not practice looking tough. Upstairs, bedtime was a tide that tugged at ankles. Mira brushed her teeth with her hair elastic around her wrist like a promise. Eli lined his pencil case next to the weather log as neatly as a runway. Joe stood in the doorway again, only this time she didn't hover. "Hey," she said, as if starting mischief. "Dad," he looked up because he would always look up when called that way. "Yeah," she held out the roll paper. "Put it up," she said. "High enough we have to read." He took it like it was the fragile, exact thing it was and hung it over the kitchen doorway with tape that would pull paint someday and make a mark he would never repair completely. They all stood there, heads tipping back, reading their rule. "Number 6, Eli said suddenly, eyes bright with an idea. "We don't have a 6, Joe said. "Now we do," Eli said, and took the marker and wrote in a color like sunrise. 6, keep the lights on for late arrivals. The room went still. Sarah made a sound that was both laugh and sob, because late arrivals were all they had ever been, and yet here they were, counted and welcomed. 7, Mira whispered, and drew a tiny star next to it. 7, say her name often. She underlined Nadia like an invitation. They went to bed. Adrian stayed in the kitchen with the list and the leftover cups, and the feeling of his life fitting his shoulders for the first time. He turned the lights off one by one, leaving the entry light on. For late arrivals. On the roof, the wind had a memory of Eli's kite. On the back wall of Nadia House, Mira's timeline waited for more dates. In the yard, Joe's pads leaned against a chair, ready for small fists aiming at air. Down the block, the lot's sign, open late for love, swung once and settled. And because YouTube stories like endings you can see from a drone. Imagine this. The camera lifting, past the windows where 3 identical small figures sleep with different dreams. Past the balcony where a man stands with a hand on a cooling railing. Past the roof where a ribbon tied to a stick flutters like an unbragging flag. Lifting high enough that the city becomes a map with lit beads threading a single line between 2 small homes, and a stubborn new building named for a woman who taught them all how to keep going. The line holds. Lights stay on. The triplets, who didn't know they had a father, sleep now in a world where he will be there when they wake. And in the morning, because rules are rules, he will burn the first pancake on purpose and start again. And they will laugh like people who have decided to be a family. Which is to say, they will choose it and then keep choosing.